Hey friends, I hope you guys are doing well today. Happy Easter weekend. I'm really excited to be sharing about remembrance. I think this is so timely for this weekend as we celebrate and as we remember the work of Christ on the cross and his resurrection. So what is the importance of remembrance? Why does that set us up for victorious living? Throughout the Bible, we see God prompting his people to remember. Even Moses, during his final address to the Israelites in Deuteronomy 4 verse 9, he says this: "Be careful never to forget what you yourself have seen. Do not let these memories escape from your mind as long as you live. And be sure to pass them on to your children and grandchildren." And he reminds them that God himself has never forgotten the covenant that he's created with the people of Israel. So we must follow suit. We have to be people who remember how faithful God has been to us in the past. So when we dive into the end of Deuteronomy, we see a transition of power. Moses has passed away and Joshua is taking the reins. And the story of Jericho is all too familiar to us. We teach kids songs about this and we reflect on the metaphor of walking around those walls and taking over that city when it comes to things in our lives and the battles that we face. But I think a lot of times we forget that these Bible characters are human. Oftentimes we superhumanize them and we have such high expectations from them, but they definitely also struggled with things in their minds and their lives as far as insecurity is concerned, or doubt, or fear, or shame. So even in Joshua's case, right, he's only human, and he is following up a pretty tough act, because Moses, up until this point, Moses was the face of this Exodus. Moses was the one that God had talked to at the burning bush and said, "Hey, I need you to guide my people out of Egypt," right? And up until this point, these people have only known Moses as their leader. And so Joshua has some pretty big shoes to fill. When we come to Joshua chapter 3, these people are standing in front of the Jordan River, and they need to cross it, and they're so close to the promised land. And I'm just imagining in my head, right? These people have already witnessed Moses in front of the Red Sea. The Red Sea parts, they're able to walk through, and their enemies are captured in this process. I can only imagine there were so many types of personalities in this crowd with Joshua. And I'm thinking there were probably some people that are watching Joshua and be like, "Joshua, we've done this before. This is just part 2. You go ahead. Let's get it done. We got to get to the promised land." But I'm sure there were also people who were like, you want to do what Moses did? That's funny, right? Who doubted him and filled his mind with insecurities. And so, again, we have to remember, this isn't like 5 or 10 people. This is thousands of people who are probably voicing their opinions. And so in this situation, I've always wondered, like, how does Joshua keep his head right? How does he stay anchored in the Lord? But one thing we have to remember is that the Israelites weren't the only ones that witnessed how God worked through Moses. Joshua was at Moses' right hand. I'm sure he was soaking in any kind of knowledge he could take, any kind of experience he could get with Moses, as far as his leadership skills and how he followed the Lord. But I'm also very sure that Joshua had the discernment to see that it wasn't the act of man that got them this far. It was the supernatural working of the God of Israel backing Moses up, going before them and behind them. He was a witness to all these miracles and all these signs, and he's seen that God has been faithful before, and he knows that God will continue to be faithful to them. So when it came to the Jordan, Joshua was ready to just follow directions, right? He told the priests, when it's time, I want you to walk right into that river. And we see that as the priests step into the river, the water stops and the land dries up and they're able to cross again. And I've just been so moved by the fact this is a repetitive theme where God invites his people to remember how faithful he's been before and to remind them that he can continue to be that God for them. So that being said, I want to draw your attention to why remembrance is so significant on a day like today, Good Friday or Easter Sunday, and also why it's so powerful in our day-to-day lives. In Psalm 23, we see that even when we're walking through the valley and death is staring us in the face, that God is providing a table for us. And whenever I read that, I'm immediately thinking about the Lord's table, communion, right? What is communion? In Luke 22:19, As Jesus is breaking the bread and he's giving it to his disciples, one thing that he says is that they would do this, partake in this table in remembrance of him, the work that is about to be done, right? Before the death of Jesus, we really didn't have the right to walk up to this table. We didn't really have a seat at this table. But the whole story of redemption reminds us that now we have a seat at this table because the King of heaven and earth, he sent his only begotten Son so that he would die for the broken, the sinful, the lost people, so that we would be redeemed and that we could be called sons and daughters. I pray and I hope that as a church that we have not forgotten or we have not lost sight of the awe and the wonder of this story because we've been so comfortable with religion all this time. I pray that we would dive into, this is quite literally the greatest love story that's ever been told. And I hope we can read this and remember this and realize that God did this for me. Right? Even when we walk through difficulties in life, even when we feel like we failed, or even when we feel like our weaknesses are way too much for us to handle, to remember that he died on that cross for me. Oftentimes, we find ourselves sitting at this table with our greatest enemies. The enemy of fear, the enemy of doubt, the enemy of shame, of guilt, of sin. And these enemies are the worst company during a feast, right? And this is the beautiful part of the story, because when you are sitting at God's table, the invitation was never extended to your fear. It was never extended to your doubt, your sin. It was only extended to you. And what happens is when you spend that time in communion with the Lord, you are suddenly surrounded by his fragrance. You become more and more like him. And the beauty of that is that when the enemy gets a whiff of that fragrance, the fragrance of the presence of God, his schemes, his attacks, anything that he's written over your life becomes undone. Because he cannot stand the fragrance of the presence of God. We need to understand and tap into the authority and the power that comes with being a child of God. Oftentimes, we settle for being victims of these things, but do you realize that as a son, as a daughter of a risen king, that you carry the fragrance, you carry this presence that makes Satan turn and run the other way? But again, when you have all of these enemies sitting at your table, they won't let you. They're screaming at you. They're filling your mind with things that you shouldn't be engaging with. So even today, God is inviting you to sit at his table and to commune with him, to remember his body that was broken, the blood that was shed for you, to be set free from all of these enemies, to be set free from all of these traps in your mind. This leads us to how powerful the remembrance is to our day-to-day lives. When we remember what God has done for us through his son Jesus, when we remember the number of times that God has been faithful, how much his favor has followed us, his goodness has so evidently followed us, no matter what life throws our way, our response will always be praise. Our response will always be gratitude. When we believe that the same God who did it then can do it now, our only response will be worship. As a generation, if we were to remember the goodness of God in the past, we would be able to walk through seasons by saying, "Great is thy faithfulness." When we walk through seasons of transition, God, great is thy faithfulness. When we are uncertain and the road seems kind of bleak, God, great is your faithfulness. When we're praying for a nation that's being crushed by political unrest and disease, God, great is your faithfulness. And even when our weaknesses surround us and when we feel like we've fallen short, our response will always only be, "Great is thy faithfulness." I'm praying today that if you're watching this and if you feel like there's an impossibility in your life right now, that you would remember and realize that Jesus put death to death. Not even the grave could contain and hold him. So your impossibility stands no chance against the power of our God. So today, again, I invite you to reflect, take some time. Take time every day. I hope that we can challenge ourselves to take time every day to remember not only the cross, not only the resurrection, but take time to remember the times in your life that God has shown up. The impossibilities that you faced and how He has made a way where there seems to be no way. I say this all the time. He is making ways in the water. He's making ways in the wilderness. That's just what He does. In the most unnatural circumstances, He is showing up. And He is doing what only He can do. So let's just surrender and remember and reflect and walk the walk of victors. Because our God has won, He has overcome, and He is risen. So friends, I hope you stay blessed. I hope you're encouraged by this word. And I hope that you challenge yourself to take some time every day to remember what God has done. Stay blessed. Happy Easter. We'll see you guys soon.